In summary, Rich, Mr. Seacrest, could you explain to the public that basically, and these are my words, not yours, if I'm putting words in your mouth, correct me and let the public know the correct terminology. But basically, a year ago, December, we basically had an agreement with Fish and Wildlife of the plan that was going forward that we'd agreed to. And then about in the 11th hour, they decided they didn't, for some reason, that wasn't either good enough, or I don't know what the reasoning is, because I'm not sure that any of us have ever really officially got the reasoning as to why the plan that we'd agreed to wasn't going to work. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. You know, we, I guess beginning back in around March of 2013, you know, we started my efforts, and I know those of John Willis, since we got involved in this, were to show that there was minimal impact from the land development activities in mesquite on the endangered species. We just didn't believe it. We didn't think there was much impact, and so we were working to reduce the scope of this proposed plan. In 2013, in the executive committee meeting, a determination was made to proceed with a habitat conservation plan instead of the habitat conservation and recovery plan. The recovery part of it is the corrective actions to improve the habitat, to actually go in and undertake measures to improve habitat for the species, help them to propagate and so forth. We narrowed it, got it reduced down to where it was just doing the plan. Also, on July 15th of 2013, the executive committee reduced the scope of the plan. Instead of looking at the entire, not just the riparian area along the river, but the old plan as it was initially formulated, looked at all of the drainages that came into the river, ephemeral washes, and we got it reduced down to just the 100-year floodplain along the river. We have this requirement out there that we do this hydrological monitoring and mitigation. It has to do with the wells that Virgin Valley Water District drills for our culinary water. They were trying to determine if using those wells for culinary water was impacting the river, water levels on the river. There was a Department of Interior model that showed that there was, the impacts were likely not measurable and very little impact. So it was again a question of whether that was even something we needed to pursue. But we got the number of wells they were going to require us to drill, or Virgin Valley, I guess, to drill 8 test wells to do this monitoring. We got it reduced down to the existing wells, monitoring those wells to determine if there was any impact on the river. So all the way along, we've been trying to narrow the scope of this thing down. Well, you know, in 2014, in February, Fish and Wildlife asked to do a field trip up here. They wanted to go along the river, look at the improvements that we had made along the washes and the river itself, look at the irrigation company's improvements and what they'd done. And they were trying to determine, get a real handle on what were the impacts to the endangered species. Well, during that field trip, and they brought most of their biologists, fish and wildlife biologists with them, and as we went up and down the river, most of the biologists felt that the major impacts were from non-native species that were invasive species coming up from Lake Mead, the red shiner and others. And clearly that has absolutely nothing to do with anything we're doing in Mesquite as far as land development. It's not caused by us, and we didn't think that we should be having to mitigate for it. So anyway, things were going our way. We were feeling pretty good. This is, you know, we're narrowing this thing down. We're showing that there's very little impact. And then out of the blue, Fish and Wildlife decided to kind of change course, and at one of our executive committee meetings, they said, look, instead of doing this HCP with the incidental take permit, let's do a conservation plan and have a memorandum of agreement between some of the key partners along the river, Southern Nevada Water Authority, Virgin Valley Water, but we won't actually issue a take permit. We won't go through that process because it's much more, the requirements are much more stringent, et cetera. And this is, a similar process is being used in Utah on the upper Virgin River. So they said, let's kind of change gears and do that. And we told Fish and Wildlife that, you know, if they really think that that's a better approach, we're not necessarily opposed to it, except that they've got to show us that we have coverage under the Endangered Species Act, have to show us that it's not going to result in a big delay, have to show us that it can be done within the money that we have left in the Mesquite Lands Act. Well, time went by, they couldn't assure us that we were really going to have coverage under the Endangered Species Act. They couldn't figure out a way for us to get out of the requirement of the Mesquite Lands Act that said we had to do a habitat conservation plan. So we concluded that we needed to just push forward. And we told them that's what we wanted to do, push forward with the HCP, get the take permit, get our consultant going, and so forth. Then we were called to a meeting down at the Fish and Wildlife offices, and Mike Sen, who's the regional coordinator, told us, we don't think you can meet the criteria for an HCP in any case. That was the first time we'd ever heard any kind of negative comment about where we were headed. And so we were trying to figure out, well, what criteria don't we meet? Basically, I think it came down to money, budget. They didn't feel that we had the wherewithal to not only complete the plan, but to implement it. All along, Fish and Wildlife has wanted recovery projects to recover the species. And they want the money spent to do that, not just do a plan, but, you know. Anyway, so they said, we don't think you can meet the criteria, and even if you did do a plan, we probably wouldn't issue the take permit. So at that point, there's no point in going forward if we can't get a permit. And, you know, things were falling apart. The Southern Nevada Water Authority said, look, guys, you know, they got the feeling that Fish and Wildlife was looking at them as the deep pocket people that was going to fund all these recovery actions. And they said, we're not going to continue with the plan. We're not going to be permittees. They felt like they already had ESA coverage from the Bureau of Reclamation. They didn't really need to do it. They're willing to help out where they could, and they've said all along that, you know, SNWA would contribute $100,000 a year to river fish recovery efforts, but they weren't going to get stuck with a giant tab for this thing, which is the way it was looking after we had that field trip up here. Anyway, make a long story short, you know, we've gone back and forth.
Too late for that.
Well, you're right. I apologize. But we've gone back and forth over the years. You know, we expand the process, we narrow it, we change the target, and so frankly, you know, now we're just waiting for the Congress to act, if they will, and then see what Fish and Wildlife wants to do.
Councilman Mayfield.
Just to summarize for those of you who are here from the government class at the high school, this is like your government teacher giving you an assignment at the beginning of the week. It's due on Friday morning. Thursday night at about midnight or 12:01, he sends out a text that he changes the whole assignment and it's due when you get to school. That's what we've been dealing with. And that's what we continue to deal with. We thought we had an agreement, we went forward, it continues to change. Now it's extended till 2016, and then they're gonna decide whether they like it or not. And if they don't like it, it's the same old song and dance. I think at some point, we ought to have Fish and Wildlife come right here, let's put them on the record, and let's have them tell us exactly what we need to do, and put them to their word. I mean, it's like a moving target. So I don't want those of you out here that are listening to think that we haven't been trying to work on this and get this completed. Staff's done an excellent job. We continue to get just spun around by the bureaucracy. And at some point, we need to find some answers and get to the bottom of this. So there's been a lot of money spent already for this plan. So anyway, Richard, I do appreciate the timelines, the efforts, but I think at some point we need to have a meeting here and get some things on the record from the folks that are going to ultimately approve or disapprove this agreement.
Okay, Councilman Rapson.
Yeah, I hope you guys are paying attention. We're dealing with the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, these are government bodies who stay in business by creating paperwork. That's how they grow. They don't make widgets that are good or bad, and if they're good, they sell a lot more and they can grow their business. They grow by creating bureaucracy. And we saw how well the old EPA worked in Colorado on a river that I have a house very close to, the San Juan, beautiful, is now yellow. And they knew about it, and they were going to protect us. Yeah. Great, good job. BLM, all of a sudden we got a potential fracking operation just up above our water wells up here, and they forgot we were a key player. Somebody that might have be an interested party, I should say. They forgot to include us in any of the discussions. Looking out for us, the little guy. These are government bureaucracies. They'll spin you around until you can't figure out whether you're up or down. And I'm with Mr. Hafen here. I want to see the Fish and Wildlife stand up here and give us a presentation of why and what and how. We've been fighting for one plan and one fee for years now. And we thought we were really close. We're not anymore. We're further away than we were when we started. We fired consultants that were worthless. We've tried our best to get this thing done. And I get the impression that there's those who think there's some conspiracy, there's something that could have been done better. Well, let's open this up to the public. Let's create a committee if we want to and put the 2 or 3 most qualified citizens that know more about this than anybody else in this thing and get this out in the open and get it. They need to take a position and they need to explain themselves. They don't explain themselves. They just say, nah, we're done. We don't think it's going to work anymore. And it's always the money and the bureaucracy. And to make a short story long, when I was at Solstice, we wanted a box culvert that was probably, I'm guessing 300 or 400 yards long. 2 years, 2.5 years. And we were jacked around by the BLM, Fish and Wildlife, Regional Flood Control, Army Corps of Engineers. And miraculously, when we got so close we could smell it, the guy that made the decisions retired. And they brought a whole new crew in, and it started the process over again. 2.5 years. I'm telling you, this is a battle that we can't win unless we get in their face and call them accountable to the public, because that's how they work. They work behind the curtain. They're the guys behind the curtain you can't see.
Okay. I don't see any other comment, so I'm going to